Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Betty. I'm known as the Witch from the North here on YouTube and on Instagram. Today's video is the first of its kind on my channel. I'm going to be doing an interview with a fellow content creator. His name is Lancel, and he's known as the Island Witch on Instagram. He's been a practitioner for about 4 years roughly, and he studies Kabbalah, Tarot, and he practices folk magic. So if you'd like to learn more about Lancel, then stay tuned. We're also going to be talking about Wicca as a doorway to witchcraft, as well as ageism in the occult community, and some beginner and budget-friendly tips for any new witches. So stay tuned. If you haven't already, make sure you grab some tea, light a candle and some incense, and get nice and cozy. My guest today is Lancel, the Island Witch, and we're going to talk a little bit about his journey up until this point, and then we're going to have an open discussion about some of the topics that we've chosen for today. So, Lancel, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so hello, I'm Lancel. You might know me from Instagram as Lancel the Island Witch, or maybe on Twitter at Lancel D. I am one of the hosts of the podcast Rosemary by the Bucketful, which is going to air on Friday the 13th this November, with obviously you. I am a folk practitioner. I've been into this for around 4 to 5, I'd say exploring this like 4 to 5-ish years. Formally studying it for like 2 years. I'm pagan, and what else? I work with Hecate, which is a Greco-Roman goddess. I'm also exploring Kabbalah, and I love tarot.
For our viewers who don't know what the Kabbalah is, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so essentially, Kabbalah in a nutshell is Jewish mysticism that was passed down orally from the older versions of the Bible.
I love how you said you've been practicing for about 4 or 5 years, but really started studying 2 years ago. So I want to ask you, what made you switch from Catholicism to what you're currently studying now?
I think I was like always pagan-minded, and I was always into the practice, but like not formally studying it. I think the institution that I was somewhat raised in, it was somewhat toxic. So I think that made me explore to some extent.
I feel like that that's something that a lot of people can relate with, especially myself. I come from a Christian background. I felt like that was also an influence that pushed me towards exploring the occult. As you said, some of the newer New Age practitioners, or the younger generation, tend to lean in more towards the New Age concepts and Wicca as a form or an entry point into the craft. And why do you think your entry point was different?
Well, funnily enough, when I entered, it was actually really Wiccan influenced and New Age. So 3-ish years ago, it was always like Wicca. I think that Wicca is like a really, how do you say this? One of the more popular traditions, like surface level wise, in my opinion. So I'm not saying that it's shallow, but I think as you deep dive more, you tend to find more specific traditions. But I think it's somewhat toxic to assume that. I'm not going to say this as in like a derogatory way, but I don't practice anything New Age or Wiccan, because like when you tend to see someone who's younger, I think a lot of people are ready to assume they're Wiccan or into New Age stuff, which I am really not. I'm into Appalachian folk magic, Kabbalah, and tarot.
I agree with that. Yeah, I don't practice Wicca, and I don't follow Wicca as my path, but that was my introduction to witchcraft. And I practiced for probably a year and a half to 2 years prior to leaving my craft. And I left my craft because I had an uncle basically tell me, after he found out that I was interested in practicing, that I was going to hell. So that kind of pushed me away from it a bit. And I went throughout my life for probably over a decade not in touch with my spirituality or any sort of faith or the craft at all. And it was only within the last 4-ish years that I rediscovered my spirituality and started exploring that more so, and going back into my craft, but from a different perspective. It was a lot of shadow work in the beginning, I feel like, a lot of shadow work, and just getting to know myself on a deeper level, and in turn being connected more so to the earth and nature. It was very nature-based, my practice was in the beginning, and still is. But I do think that a lot of the information that I received, even though I don't subscribe to it, was very Wiccan based.
I think on the evolution of my craft, funnily enough, I spent like a year being an atheist. I still studied and learned the craft, and I still honed it, but I became an atheist. And then a year after, I had a really toxic teacher basically telling us that all other religions are false. Everyone who doesn't believe or worship the Judeo-Christian God worships the devil, and everything else is either evil or false. And I think that made me explore.
Now, what made you decide to work with the Greco-Roman, specifically Hecate, because you had mentioned Hecate?
Funnily enough, it wasn't really her calling me. It was our coven, the Wanderer's Coven, on Discord. We had an invocation of her in August, and we basically invoked her, and I think it was like really beautiful to me. And then I started seeing her in dreams, and then I was like, without getting into the specifics of it, I did the invocation on my own, and I think it was also really beautiful. And then she started appearing in dreams and like showing signs, and I think that's what made me work with her to some extent.
Do you feel like when you started to become more active in the online community is when you started to branch out more in your craft?
Yes, I agree. I joined online Discord servers started 2 years ago, and it was March, I think, that I joined the Wanderer's Coven. And I think since meeting everyone there, I think I started branching out.
I have a similar experience in that my practice in the beginning, when I was introduced, was very much just solely based on myself. I think once I started to become more active in the online community, it helped me branch out more and learn more. So it's nice to know that experience is something that others share as well.
Yeah, there's like a difference in quality of information besides community when you're downloading PDFs in the beginning from the internet, then like 4 years after, just joining online Discord servers and having chats and video calls with people.
And that's a huge difference that for us as a community now to be able to have that as a resource. Because when I was younger and I first kind of was introduced to it, I didn't have that community, that online community of people to help kind of guide me. And I didn't have a mentor either. And it wasn't something that was very common or spoke about, especially in my area or my community. So to look for others who shared my beliefs was nearly impossible to find where I am from, because my location is very Christian based. So to find somebody who shared the same beliefs as I do, or I did, and to guide me on the path that I was embarking on, I didn't have that. So it's nice to see that we have that community now where somebody who is interested can learn in multiple different platforms, and kind of find what path they like to follow and go with that path and have a plethora of information that they can learn from.
Funnily enough, that my name on IG came because I thought I was like the only practitioner on the island. And it wasn't until I joined that platform that I found community in my country.
Right. And I love that. I love that aspect now for practitioners. You know, back in 2000, 2001, that wasn't the case at all.
Yeah.
You had to know somebody in that community in order for you to learn from a mentor. Whereas now you can find a mentor online or just a community that you can learn from, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the positives of everything just being more popular.
Exactly. And that goes back to the Wicca as a door to witchcraft. Not the only one, but Wicca has made it a little bit more mainstream. So we're having more people come into the community now, willing to learn and explore. So that's definitely a benefit. What do you think are some benefits of having Wicca as a door to witchcraft, and maybe what are some of the cons that you think?
I think it's like one of the less taboo sides of the craft. I think people are more likely to handle being Wiccan than practicing Sympathetic craft or Talima or Kabbalah to some extent.
I agree. Yeah, there's still a lot of stigma or stereotypes surrounding some of the other paths, and Wicca seems to be more widely accepted. What do you think are some of the cons that Wicca as an entry point to witchcraft? What do you think are some of the cons there?
Okay, so when we have like online communities, Wiccans, I'm not like saying all Wiccans are mean or how do you say this? Gatekeepers. I think a lot of Wiccans are really nice in real life, and online you can shout at someone in the comments and you're not gonna get slapped in the face. So I think the problems with Wicca is that there's a lot of people shouting about the rule of three, specifically mostly to practitioners who don't believe in the rule of three. And the thing is that not all Wiccans believe in the rule of three. The rule of three, if you don't know, is something that Dorian Valiente added after Gerald Gardner's death, which was based on a poem. And if you read Curses, Hexes, Jinxes by S. Connolly, I think, she has a whole chapter about how the rule of three was added after Gardner's death. And a lot of people tend to like say, lest he harm none, do what he will. There's actually another verse after it saying, lest it be in self-defense. So it's like somewhat an open philosophy. What would you consider self-defense? Binding, curses, hexes? I think that constitutes as self-defense in some areas and situations.
It's interesting that you bring that up because there has been a lot of transformation or add-ons to the original concept of Wicca that Gardner created back in, what was it, the late 30s, 40s?
It was practiced in the 30s and 40s and became more public in the 50s and 60s. Yeah, so you have from Gardnerian Wicca, you have Alexandrian Wicca, and then you have Dianic Wicca, which was formed as a feminist group.
So we were talking about Wicca as an entry point, some of the pros and the cons. We talked about how Wicca itself has evolved as well and changed a bit from the different people who have taken it and run with it and created their own like covens. And I also think it's important to note too that Wicca is not very old. Like it's new.
A practice. Yeah.
Yeah, and so a lot of the people who embark on this path, I think it's important for them to know that this is actually a newer religion, and there are forms of witchcraft, obviously, that date back way further than
Yeah. Wicca it's not even 100 years old, but it was based on Celtic Reconstructionism and the Golden Dawn.
Exactly.
If not everyone knows that, Gerald Gardner was actually really good friends with Aleister Crowley. So he was familiar with the Golden Dawn. And so what he did was that he got the beliefs from the English cults, the cults from the British Isles, and just mashed it with the Golden Dawn. So it has old roots, but it's not itself isn't old. It's not old. A good book on the originations of the craft would be Buckland's big blue book. I forgot the name. Buckland's complete book on witchcraft. It has the origination of sympathetic magic. So how hunters stabbed statues of animals, and they found that it helped them have a better hunt. So that's where we see sympathetic magic first, and I think it all evolved from there.
I think it's really important in the beginning. For me, I'm fairly new to starting to study more of the different paths and the different pantheons and mythologies and stuff like that. So I think it's really important when you begin your path to kind of keep it an open mind and try and read as much as you can to see what resonates with you prior to trying to subscribe to one path, because you may find that when you're on that path, some of the things that are within it are not things that work for you or that you resonate with. And read as much as you can and draw from different sources, and of course always cross-reference any research that you're doing.
I think you can never cement yourself into this path. I think for me it's like been many phases. I was like Norse, then I'm gonna be a druid, which I wasn't, and now it's tarot and Kabbalah, and at some point it was Wicca, and then it was Welsh, and me just exploring Celtic tree magic.
You can learn and read about all of these things, but you don't need to subscribe to something, especially in the beginning. And like I am 4 years in roughly, and I still haven't like really subscribed to a certain path in terms of like one way of doing things. I would say that my practice is very folk magic based, but it's also eclectic. Did you want to talk about ageism in the occult community?
I feel like it's a real thing, and that older people tend to assume that younger practitioners are like New Age, Wicca, and I'm not really about that. Mm-hmm. Even if I'm like reading on Wicca, I'm gonna openly say I don't like the New Age. It comes from Theosophy, and I don't resonate with that. I'm not like openly attacking anyone. I'm just like, this doesn't make sense to me, then I'm not gonna include it.
But also I think with ageism specifically, there's this mindset that if you're a younger practitioner, it's almost, I feel like some of the older practitioners, older in age, will have a concept that because they're younger, they don't have enough experience or they don't have enough knowledge to really know what they're talking about. And I feel like for somebody to assume because you're younger that you don't know what you're talking about, I think is naive. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like people assume that because someone is older, they might take practicing it more seriously than somebody is younger, which is not the case at all. And I feel like that's not a fair assumption to make. And just because a practitioner is older does not mean that they are going to make wise decisions, especially if they are a new practitioner. They could still make a lot of the same mistakes that somebody would assume a younger practitioner would make. So I think it's important to really understand that age shouldn't be, we shouldn't discriminate against younger practitioners because of their age, thinking that, they're not as experienced and they still have a lot to learn before they are at the level that, somebody who's older is.
I'm just gonna say that if you just started, I wouldn't recommend just like Solomonic evocation, because that's impossible and unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
You should study up, but you shouldn't become an armchair magician and never practice.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, even though if you have your own bias, an author's bias and experience isn't your own. So if an author tackles this way, you might tackle this differently. I think if you're like in your 50s and you're like, I practiced this for 30 years, obviously you're gonna have a higher level of knowledge than someone who's been practicing for like 4 or 5 years. Like, I'm gonna use a mundane example because I'm like somewhat familiar with knitting or sewing. Just because you sewn a scarf for 30 years doesn't mean you inherently know how to make a knit hat. So just because you practice one paradigm or tradition doesn't mean you're familiar with another one to the extent that people are like hoping that you know.
The individual, I think, is important, not age, but the individual person. Let's take you and I, for example. Our paths are completely different. Age has nothing to do with our paths. You and I have been practicing roughly the same, but because our life circumstances have influenced the way that we approach things, you've done a lot of reading on very different topics than I've done reading on.
Let's say you've been spending like 20 years casting runes, and I just like read tarot for 5 years, for example. You might know what tarot is, but you might not know how to read the cards. And I just might not know how to read runes.
Yeah, like that's kind of where I was going with that. And also just to say that we could both be practicing the same amount of time, but the effort that we put into our craft is very indicative of what we get out of it. So, I could be practicing for 4 years and only read like, a handful of books on a certain topic, whereas you could be practicing for 4 years and have read 20 to 30 books on that same topic.
Tarot, I only do like a card a day. Like I don't do full-blown reading, like 20 cards every day. Like, no, it's not realistic for me. I just do a card a day, and I don't even know the whole. I still need to reference like a book, even though I've been almost doing it every day since starting.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, is that it's called a practice for a reason, right? You have to work it. You have to. It's not just about reading, but it's also about working it as well. And the more time that you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. How do you feel the stereotypes of ageism in the community has affected your practice? Do you feel like it has affected your practice?
Well, to some extent, I think I have a lot of friends in like the coven. I want to say coven. I don't really surround myself with a lot of toxic people actually, but to some extent it affects a lot of us. Like self-doubt is a big thing, and imposter syndrome is a thing. When you see like YouTubers with like thousands of subscribers and they're like older than you, I think it affects you.
So why don't you start us off with budget tips or beginner-friendly tips?
Okay, so what is this? This is yarn. I don't think I need to explain what yarn is, but like in folk magic it's really used a lot, especially in healing, where like red, you use it when someone has a cold. You use blue when someone has a fever and you want to cool them down. What does that signify? It's sympathetic magic. When you use something like this. It's sympathetic magic. You're showing your intention in physical form. So yeah, that's sympathetic magic. Just like if you have a tiny toy car and you want to put protection in your car, sympathetic magic, you can use whatever is around you. And in the mundane, you don't really need all these tools. Like, you can just like knit and just like put intention and while knitting.
I love that you'd mentioned that it is 100% about being intentional with your actions. It's not, I don't want to go on a tangent, but like it's not just intention, but it's about being intentional.
Yeah.
And I think that is the factor that a lot of new witches really need to hone in on, is being very intentional with their actions. Do you have any other tips?
Intention isn't everything, but realistically, with our day-to-day lives, we can't just go like summoning Babylon every day. And yeah, in like a 9-foot Solomonic circle. Like some people don't even have the width of their apartment to do that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Always use white if you don't have any other color, or black. What else? You can use tea lights, this, pillars. The dollar store's heaven. You don't need to buy jars. You can just repurpose like salsa jars. Just get rid of the label by boiling it. Use plates and bowls that you already have. You don't need to buy like fancy holders. Herbs from the grocery store, grow them yourself. It's cheaper.
So for me, when I first began, it was a lot, like you said, color magic, using color correspondence for things to put forth my intention, using the different color candles. Again, utilizing the dollar store is a huge tip that I think most people will agree upon. Birthday candles, tea light candles, utilizing nature, like your geographic location, which again is one of the reasons why I'm super excited about getting the Year of a Witch by Temperance Alden. But getting to know the plant life and the wildlife in your location, I think, is a really big thing, because if you can't grow it and maybe you don't have a whole lot of money to spend on different herbs and stuff at the grocery store, if you get to know your wildlife and your plants in your location, you can utilize some of that. For example, around here, around where I am located, goldenrod grows like crazy. I can walk down the street and find goldenrod. Now, goldenrod is used for things like prosperity. So I could go out and harvest that and use that in my work without having to spend any money whatsoever. So I think that that is a great tip to give new beginners, is familiarizing yourself with the plants and wildlife in your location and using what you already have, using nature as that tool in your craft, I think is one of the most important things.
I think we tend to forget that most folk practitioners use what they had around them, and we also need to normalize that Solomon was a king. You can't just have like a whole temple with just like censers made of gold burning the most expensive frankincense, incense. Realistically, unless you were a king, no one realistically went to this like store where you can buy like embellished holder for your crystals.
Right, exactly. And I mean, if you have the means to, and that's something that you want to do and that resonates with you, by all means go ahead. But we're basically saying that it's not necessary
Not
for your
needed,
craft. And it doesn't, like, whether you spend $10 on a candle or $1 on a candle, it's a candle, and it's going to serve the same purpose in your work. Do you have any final thoughts or questions before we end it off?
Do we explore other traditions, like several traditions?
Well, as I said in the beginning, I'm very like secular in my craft. So I don't work with like a specific religion or pantheon, but I am starting to open up and read more about different deities and different traditions. I don't utilize, it's pretty much folk magic for me.
I do tend to explore a lot of traditions. I wouldn't say I really like worship any specific deity or just work with that tradition. I'm like open to all of them, but I'd rather use the Greco-Roman tradition first. What type are we? Like, I'd consider myself a practitioner, like folk practitioner. Like the question was like, which type are you? I don't really use that.
I don't subscribe to the new age witch types like crystal witch or candle witch. I would say folk practitioner. I'm very eclectic in like different styles, but yeah, the type of magic that I do on a regular basis is probably candle magic, but that's not like my witch type. I just have a few specific questions. I had, what element do you like to work with the most?
Oh, okay. I think everyone's gonna know the answer before I respond to this. It's fire. I like to set stuff on fire a lot. And I use a lot of candle magic, petitions, burning herbs.
I feel like mine is very similar to yours. Candle magic is where I go. I like to burn things as well.
But like also inherently, this is all the elements. You have the wax, which is earth. You have the water, which is the melted wax. You have the air, which is required to burn it. And the fire, which is obviously the fire and the wick.
What is your favorite form of divination?
Okay, tarot. Tarot and pendulums coming up close again. I'm like really exploring tarot right now. So Kabbalistic Tarot is a really good book if you want to mix Kabbalah with tarot.
Tarot for me as well. I started with 78 Degrees of Wisdom.
The Pictorial Key to tarot is so specific. It's like, why are there pineapples on the like veil in the High Priestess?
And I like that you mentioned that book too, because I'm very much like, when I read my tarot, I'm very much like intuitive. I'll look at the imagery and read it like that versus memorizing the meanings of each card.
Yeah, so it's either like intuitively or Kabbalistic, where you have like the magician connect to this pot, or the Four of Cups connect to this Sephiroth.
Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm very excited. And before you go, I just want to mention to everybody here to make sure to go check out Lancel's social media. And he mentioned at the beginning, I'll also link it below. And we are doing a podcast together that is going to be airing on the 13th of November. And you can go ahead if you want.
I.e. Friday the 13th. That accident, like it was a coincidence.
I love it. I thought it was so awesome.
I didn't like plan it.
I'm like, what a perfect day. So that was my interview with Lancel. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions for us, please leave them in the comment section below. I'm going to try to link all of the books that we've mentioned in the description box, as well as the podcast that again will be airing on the 13th of November. So keep an eye out for that on both of our Instagrams. We will be updating you. And again, if you have any further questions, please leave them below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye.